Most people believe motivation is the engine of change. They wait for it. They chase it. They rely on it to start again after every setback. And when motivation fades, as it always does, they assume something is wrong with them. They think they're lazy, undisciplined, inconsistent. But the real issue isn't a lack of motivation. It's that motivation was never meant to carry you very far. Motivation is emotional energy. It spikes, it surges, it excites, and then it disappears. Calm doesn't do that. Calm doesn't surge. It doesn't push. It doesn't convince. Calm stays. Yet most people don't trust calm. They associate calm with complacency, with slowing down, with losing momentum. So when calm appears, they override it. They push harder. They add urgency. They increase pressure. And in doing so, they unknowingly sabotage the very progress they're trying to create. Here's the truth most people never hear. Motivation is useful for starting. Calm is what allows you to continue. Motivation gets you moving. Calm keeps you regulated while you move. Without calm, progress feels fragile. Every step forward feels like it could collapse. Every pause feels dangerous. So people stay tense, they stay alert, they stay braced, and they confuse that tension for commitment. But tension isn't commitment. Tension is the body preparing for threat. This is why so many people feel exhausted even when they're doing things they care about. They're not building their lives from stability. They're building from adrenaline. And adrenaline is not sustainable. When motivation becomes the fuel, burnout becomes the cost, and the system eventually shuts it down. Not because you failed, but because your body refuses to live in a constant state of urgency. This is why people don't stop because they don't want it enough. They stop because their system can't hold the pace anymore. And until that changes, every burst of motivation will be followed by a crash. What most people don't realize is that the most powerful form of momentum doesn't come from excitement. It comes from calm alignment, from moving forward without forcing yourself, from acting without tension, from progress that doesn't require you to override your body to succeed. And once you understand that, the entire way you approach growth changes. When calm becomes the foundation instead of motivation, progress stops feeling like something you have to push and starts feeling like something you can sustain. To understand why calm is more powerful than motivation, you have to understand how your system actually creates consistency. Consistency doesn't come from desire. It doesn't come from intention. And it doesn't come from intensity. It comes from regulation. Your nervous system is always asking one question: can I stay here? Not, is this exciting? Not, is this meaningful? But, is this sustainable without harming me? Motivation bypasses that question. It floods the system with energy and says, we'll figure it out later. Calm answers it. Calm tells your system, we can move forward without danger. We can act without urgency. We can progress without bracing. This is why calm produces follow-through, while motivation produces bursts. Motivation asks your system to sprint. Calm teaches it how to walk without collapsing. Most people confuse intensity with commitment. They believe that if they don't feel driven, they're not serious. So they manufacture pressure, deadlines that don't need to exist, urgency that isn't required, internal threats disguised as discipline. And for a while it works, until the body says, I can't live like this anymore. That's when motivation disappears, not because you lost desire, but because your system hit its limit. Here's the key insight. Your nervous system does not respond to goals. It responds to states. If the state you're operating from is tense, rushed, self-monitoring, afraid of falling behind, then even meaningful goals become associated with stress. And once that association is formed, your system begins resisting the very things you care about. Calm interrupts that loop. Calm creates a state where action doesn't feel threatening, progress doesn't feel fragile, pauses don't feel like failure. And from that state, consistency becomes natural, not forced, not heroic, not exhausting. This is why people who appear disciplined often aren't pushing themselves at all. They're regulated. They don't rely on motivation because they don't need to override themselves to keep going. Their system isn't fighting the path forward. And once you see this, you stop asking, how do I get more motivated? You start asking, how do I create a state where action doesn't require force? That question changes everything. When your system feels safe enough to continue, progress stops being something you must initiate and starts being something that carries itself forward. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have about calm is that they think it slows progress. They believe urgency is what keeps things moving, that pressure sharpens focus, that without a sense of now or never, momentum disappears. But urgency doesn't create momentum. Urgency creates reactivity. When you act from urgency, your system is not choosing, it's responding. Responding to fear of falling behind, responding to imagined consequences, responding to internal pressure that says, if I don't do this now, something bad will happen. And while that can produce action, it comes at a cost. Urgency keeps your attention narrow. It shortens your time horizon. It makes every decision feel heavier than it needs to be. This is why urgency often leads to rushed choices, inconsistent pacing, difficulty resting, a constant sense of being on edge. And over time, that edge becomes exhaustion. Calm works differently. Calm doesn't remove momentum, it stabilizes it. When you act from calm, your system isn't bracing for impact. It's available. Available to think clearly. Available to adjust without panic. Available to continue without needing recovery afterward. This is why calm allows progress to compound. Urgency demands recovery. Calm doesn't. And that difference adds up over time. Most people don't burn out because they're doing too much. They burn out because they're doing everything from a state of internal pressure. So even rest feels loaded. Even pauses feel dangerous. Even success feels fragile. Calm dissolves that pressure at the source, not by removing ambition, but by removing the threat attached to it. When urgency fades, your system stops asking, what happens if I fail? And starts asking, what's the next stable step? That shift changes how you move. You become less reactive, more intentional, less driven by spikes of emotion, more guided by internal steadiness. And from there, momentum stops depending on how you feel today. It becomes something you can return to regardless of mood, energy, or circumstance. When urgency no longer defines your pace, progress stops burning you out and starts building something you can actually stay inside. So if calm is more powerful than motivation, the natural question becomes, how do you actually build calm without losing momentum? Because calm isn't something you force yourself into, and it's not something you think your way toward. Calm is something you practice in how you move. The first shift is this. You stop using pressure as your primary tool for action. Most people motivate themselves by creating consequences in their minds. If I don't do this, I'll fall behind. If I don't push now, I'll fail. If I slow down, I'll lose everything. That inner pressure feels productive, but it quietly teaches your system that action equals threat. Calm-based action teaches the opposite. It shows your system we can move without panic. We can act without urgency. We can pause without collapse. This starts with pace, not slowing your goals, but slowing how you enter them. You approach tasks without bracing. You begin without rehearsing failure. You act without monitoring every step. At first, this feels unfamiliar because you're used to tension being the signal to begin. So when tension isn't there, your mind asks, "Am I serious enough?" But seriousness doesn't come from pressure. It comes from consistency. And consistency is created when your system doesn't resist showing up. This is also where boundaries become essential. Calm requires space, not more time, but less internal noise. You reduce unnecessary urgency. You stop stacking obligations. You give yourself permission to move at a pace that doesn't require recovery afterward. And something interesting happens. Your energy becomes steadier. Your focus becomes clearer. Your follow-through improves. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer draining yourself before you begin. This is how calm turns into momentum. Not fast momentum, not dramatic momentum, but reliable momentum. The kind that compounds quietly and doesn't disappear when emotions change. When calm becomes the state you act from, progress stops demanding sacrifice and starts rewarding presence. When calm becomes the foundation of how you move, something important shifts. You stop needing to convince yourself to act. You don't wake up negotiating with your goals. You don't rely on emotional spikes to begin again. You don't feel like you're constantly catching up. Action becomes quieter, more deliberate, less dramatic, less exhausting. And because it's quiet, it lasts. This is why calm outperforms motivation over time. Motivation asks, "How badly do you want this today?" Calm asks, "Can you remain here tomorrow?" And that question changes everything. Because life isn't built in moments of intensity. It's built in what you return to when intensity fades. When calm is present, you don't fall apart when things slow down. You don't interpret pauses as failure. You don't treat rest as a threat. You simply continue. Not out of force, but out of alignment. This is how people build lives that don't require constant self-correction. They're not more driven. They're not more disciplined. They're more settled. And that settled state becomes the ground from which ambition can operate without burning everything around it. Calm doesn't remove desire. It gives desire a place to land. It allows effort to accumulate instead of evaporate. And once calm becomes familiar, you stop chasing motivation altogether because you no longer need it. Progress doesn't feel like something you have to summon. It feels like something you return to again and again and again. That's when growth stops being fragile and starts becoming sustainable.